The first episode of our series on the ancient Celts covered the early origins as well as culture, religion, political structure and economy of the peoples. In this second episode, we will discuss the armies of the Celts, their weapons, armours and tactics, the expansion of these ancient peoples, and their invasions of classical Rome and Greece. We're not saying that you should go into battles naked like the ancient Celts, but for the battles that you have to participate in naked, the sponsor of this video, Manscaped, is your best friend. If you've watched our channel for a while, you'll know that our historical lead is a huge fan of Manscaped and their Perfect Package Kit, the all-in-one grooming tools and formulations for the modern man. Manscaped used the feedback from millions of customers across the globe to engineer the next generation of groin and body trimmers by focusing on intelligent functionality and perfecting the ultimate grooming experience. And now they've launched their 4th generation trimmer, the new Lawnmower 4.0. Lawnmower 4.0 has advanced ceramic blades with skin-safe technology which helps reduce nicks and cuts. Its premium lithium-ion battery charges wirelessly, while the tri-level power status indicator LEDs on the front will help you see when you're low. The Lawnmower 4.0 even allows you to customize your preferred hair length with 4 trimmer guard options. So what are you waiting for? Join over 2 million men worldwide who trust their family jewels to Manscaped. Support our channel and get 20% off, plus free international shipping when you use promo code GENERALS20 at manscaped.com. Between the 4th and 2nd centuries BC, Latin Celtic culture had assimilated its way across a staggering amount of Europe. This is exemplified by modern-day countries as far apart as Portugal and Ukraine, which both have provinces named Galatia, land of the Gauls. Warfare played a huge role in this continental spread, which begs the question, what made the Celts such effective fighters? The stereotypical image of the Gallic warrior, perpetuated by Greco-Roman writers, is that of a savage, ferocious in spirit, but primitive in equipment and strategy. However, the full story is much more complex. For one thing, Gaulish arms and armour were highly advanced for their time. The Celts were master ironworkers who were able to arm their warriors with longswords and spears with specialized tips for either thrusting or throwing, making the average Gaul deadly in melee and ranged combat. For protection, the Gallic fighters bore a long oakwood shield with a hard iron boss for blunt force bashing. Most warriors wore Agan and Port type helmets, featuring a brimmed iron dome and a pair of wing-like cheek guards. There is also evidence that the Gauls were the inventors of chainmail, based on surviving pictorial evidence of a type of metal cuirass made of tightly linked iron rings, the earliest historical example of such technology. The Romans were so impressed by Gallic metallurgy that the legionary's helmet, his lorica hamata armour, and even his gladius and spatha swords were all adapted from Celtic or Celtiberian designs. So Roman armour as we know it today actually owes its iconic form in huge part to the innovations of the Celts. However, among the Celts themselves, body armour was rare, mainly reserved for select high-ranking nobles, while most warriors went into battle wearing just shirts, trousers, or in some cases, nothing at all. The naked warrior is one of the most enduring legends of Celtic history. Historical evidence suggests a significant amount of Celts did fight nude, either for religious purposes or to inspire fear in their enemies. Surviving depictions of bare-skinned Celtic combatants in both artwork and historical record suggest that while the majority of Gauls did not fight naked, the practice was fairly normalized. The use of the iconic war chariot also bears mentioning, as they were used both as versatile mobile missile units and also as basic transport vehicles, quickly ferrying warriors from one theatre of battle to another. For all their arms and armour, the principal advantage of the Gallic army was their ability to utterly terrify their foe. Both Roman and Greek records report on the petrifying nature of the Celts, claiming that before any engagement they would roar and brag, performing ritualistic war dances while bellowing a deafening sound out of their boar-headed war trumpets. Put yourself in the shoes of a superstitious plebeian fresh off an ancient olive farm or the slums of Rome, and you can appreciate the supernatural terror that a mob of screaming, dancing, horn-blaring muscle men must have had. In terms of battle tactics, the Celts kept things fairly simple. Skilled javelin throwers would soften up the enemy formation, while chariot and cavalry riders would be used to flank and harass. For the most part, a Gallic victory banked entirely on a disorganized, blood-drunk charge, the impact of which was usually enough to rout the enemy formation, making it easy to slaughter them piecemeal. Ancient Celtic warfare may have lacked the discipline of a legion or phalanx, but it wasn't primitive or basic. To the Gauls, war was a way of life, and their dynamic formula of inspiring terror in their enemies and fearlessness among themselves was what saw their armies come to dominate not just the majority of continental Europe, but also take them right up to the doorstep of a young Roman Republic. From about 450 BC, Gallic northern and central Europe became overpopulated, and many enterprising Celtic war leaders led their retinues southwards to Italy, which the Celts knew to be a bountiful land of olives, figs, and wine. According to Livy, they first entered the peninsula as early as 600 BC, when a multi-tribal band of immigrants, led by the king Bellovesus of the Bituriges, crossed the Alps and made war on the northern cities of the Etruscans, a culturally sophisticated but politically independent network of city-states whose heartland was in modern-day Tuscany. Upon driving the Etruscans out of the Po Valley, the Gauls founded the settlement of Mediolanum, the modern city Milan. Other waves of migration followed, and by 400 BC, various Gallic tribes had established themselves as the masters of a chunk of northern Italy that stretched from the Alps to the Adriatic coast. Indigenous Ligures to the west and Veneti to the east eventually became culturally assimilated by their Celtic neighbours. The Gauls were on the rise, but they were not the only growing power in Italy. In 400 BC, the city of Rome was a smallish city-state of some 25,000, living in humble homes of brick and timber, with a long ways to go to the eternal city of marble it later became. Nevertheless, in the last 100 years, the Romans had established hegemony over all of the cities of the Latin League, overthrew their monarchy, and emerged as a dynamic republic. In 396 BC, the brilliant Roman commander Marcus Furius Camillus conquered the Etruscan city of Veii, establishing a foothold for further northwards expansion, putting Rome on a collision course with the Celts. Modern historians are split on how the First Gallo-Roman War broke out. Some claim that a Gallic tribe invaded Rome on behalf of Dionysius I, the tyrant of the Greek city of Syracuse, who wanted to knock the Romans down a peg for supporting his rivals in Messina. Others claim that the warlike Celts needed no incentive to invade Rome, and simply did so for glory and plunder. According to Dionysius of Halicarnassus, the seeds of conflict were sown when the king of the Etruscan Clusium, Lucamo, engaged in a dalliance with a married woman. Her aggrieved husband, an influential merchant named Arons, went north to the Gauls of the Po Valley, seeking to use them as his instrument of revenge by convincing them to attack Clusium. Arons' call was answered by King Brennus of the Senones, who was happy to make war on Clusium, coveting its riches and fertile lands. The people of Clusium were alarmed by the Gallic horde and called to the Romans for aid. In response, the Roman Senate sent a trio of ambassadors to serve as neutral mediators. When the ambassadors asked Brennus why he made war on Clusium, he tersely replied, "For the same reason Rome conquers her neighbours." Tensions soon flared, and an armed quarrel broke out between the representatives of the Clusians and Senones. In the heat of the moment, one of the Roman ambassadors slew a Senone warrior. Brennus was infuriated by the breach in diplomatic conduct and sent envoys to Rome calling for the extradition of all three ambassadors, but his demands were refused. Thus the Gauls declared a blood feud upon the Romans and advanced southwards to settle the score. the military tribunes of Rome quickly mustered an army and marched out to meet their foe. In the 5th century BC, Rome was centuries away from fielding the professional legion. Wealthier citizens armed themselves in the style of the Greek hoplite, but the majority fought with various destandardized weapons and little protection. They made their stand on the river Allia. It was the first time the Romans had faced the Gauls in battle, and never before had they stared into the face of such ferocity. The blare of the cunnics, the relentless screaming, and the disturbing nakedness spread terror among the Latins. The battle itself was brief. From the withering hail of Gallic javelins to the shock of the charge that followed, the army of the Republic broke. Many Romans drowned in the deep waters of the Allia or were cut down. After his decisive victory, King Brennus led the Senones to Rome and put the city to the torch. It was the first time the Eternal City had ever been sacked, and it would take 800 years for any other foreign army to ever do so again. According to later Roman historians, a surviving core of senators and able-bodied citizens were able to retreat to the citadel on the Capitoline Hill to mount a defense, watching helplessly while the rest of the city was thoroughly pillaged. The Senones twice tried to take the Capitoline, first with a frontal assault, which was repulsed, and second with a nighttime infiltration, which was famously foiled by the honking of the sacred geese of Juno. After many months of impasse, both sides had become emaciated by starvation and plague. The Romans' resolve broke first, and they agreed to pay the Senones a sum of 1,000 pounds of gold to make them leave. Here Roman historian Livy claims that the Gauls weighted the measuring scales to cheat the Romans out of more tribute than had been agreed upon. When the Romans protested, Brennus threw his own sword onto the scale, bellowing "Vae victis," woe to the vanquished. According to Diodorus of Sicily, it was at exactly this moment Marcus Furius Camillus arrived with a relief army. He defiantly threw his own sword onto the scales and declared, "Non oro sed ferro recuperanda est patria. We defend Rome not with gold, but with iron." He then attacked the Gauls and drove them out of the city. These traditional recantings of the Senones' war are likely the result of Roman propaganda. Livy and Diodorus authored their accounts centuries after the sack happened, and were probably trying to salvage some honor out of a particularly dark chapter of Roman history. In particular, Camillus' last-minute heroics were likely a complete fabrication. Simply put, the true summary of the events is probably as follows. The Gauls crushed the Romans, looted their city, blockaded the Capitoline Hill, got paid, and went home. This simplistic take is plausible because the Gauls were a simple war party that probably sought nothing other than to obtain plunder and return to their families. It would take a generation for Rome to recover from the devastation brought upon it by the Senones, while conversely, Gallic influence in Italy grew ever stronger. Throughout the 4th and early 3rd centuries BC, Celtic war parties regularly plundered into the Roman hinterlands, while Gaulish mercenary groups became a staple contingent of many anti-Roman factions, such as the Greek tyrants of Sicily and a certain up-and-coming Carthaginian thalassocracy. Rome would not be the only classical civilization the Gauls would make war on. Let us now shift our focus eastwards to the land of philosophers and hoplites and talk about the Celtic invasions of the ancient Greek world. Gallic war parties had entered the northern Balkan peninsula in the early 4th century BC, where they would spend the next century in sporadic warfare with the Illyrians, Thracians, Paeonians, and other local native peoples. In 335 BC, some Gauls had made it to Macedon, which was ruled by a young and enterprising Alexander. Yes, that Alexander. The Celts were always ready to respect a worthy warrior, and showed great admiration for the Macedonian king, daring not to invade Greece while he ruled. Alexander would go on to conquer most of the known world, only to die prematurely in Babylon, leaving his massive empire to be divided up into squabbling kingdoms ruled by his former generals. This changed things, for in the eyes of the Celts, Greece was now a divided land, ruled by lesser men, a viable target for loot and plunder. In 298 BC, the Gallic chieftain Cymboles led a war party that pillaged its way through Thrace and Macedon, only to be stopped in its tracks by the army of the Diadochi king Cassander on the slopes of Mount Haemus. Nevertheless, during this expedition, the Gallic Serdi established a foothold in Thrace, founding the settlement of Serdica on the site of modern-day Sofia. The next Celtic wave would arrive in 281 BC, when a horde of 85,000 men, mostly of the Boii and Volcae tribes, split into 3 contingents and simultaneously invaded Paeonia, the rest of Thrace, and Macedon. During this expedition, a war chief known as Bulgios faced down the army of Ptolemy Kurinos, the current king of Macedon, and the son of the founder of the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. In the battle that followed, the Macedonian king himself was thrown from his war elephant and hacked to pieces by Gallic warriors. These initial successes increased the appetite for further incursions into Greece, and a year later, a chieftain known as Brenos began calling for another southwards expedition. According to legend, Brenos called for an assembly of Gallic chieftains and presented before them a group of Greek captives who were weak in body. He juxtaposed them with his finest, most well-built warriors, using this as proof that the Greeks were a weak people compared to the Gauls, and could be easily overrun. By 279 BC, Brenos had successfully assembled a massive tribal coalition. Ancient sources claim that his army amounted to a mind-boggling 150,000 warriors, but modern estimates give us a more realistic figure of 50,000. Brenos pillaged through undefended northern Greece unimpeded. Some stories claim that, when questioned on the sacrilegious nature of looting the temples, Brenos pithily remarked, "The gods, being rich, ought to be generous to men." Unbeknownst to the Gauls, a coalition of Aetolians, Boeotians, Athenians, Phocians, Corinthians, and other cities had gathered an army of 40,000, many of whom were trained hoplites. They decided to make their stand at the narrow coastal pass of Thermopylae, which was becoming a running theme at this point in ancient history. Meanwhile, a fleet of Greek triremes also docked in the nearby Malian Gulf, ready to rain death upon their landward foe. Brenos' host soon arrived, and the battle was committed. The Celts funneled right into the narrow pass and barreled into their hoplite enemies with typical Gallic fearlessness. Ancient historian Hieronymus of Cardia gave a harrowing account of the melee. They rushed with the rage, fury, and blind courage of a wild beast. They hacked with swords and axes, pierced with darts and javelins. Their fury only died with life itself. Some warriors even plucked out the weapons that had struck them and hurled them back at the Greeks. Nevertheless, the disciplined Greek phalanx held the pass, while their navy pelted the Celts with a hail of missiles. Brenos was eventually forced to retreat, having lost thousands of his warriors, while the Greeks had suffered only 40 casualties. Brenos pillaged and burned his way across Aetolia in an attempt to break up the united Greek army by forcing the Aetolian contingent to rush back to defend their homes. This worked, but the Celts were nonetheless driven off by the returning Aetolian warriors. Following this, Brenos made a final gambit, rearing his army eastwards for the sacred oracle of Delphi, hoping that seizing the riches of Apollo's temple would salvage the expedition. Here, the united Greek force reconstituted itself and made a final stand. The Gauls were crushed, losing over 16,000 men in the battle and the ensuing retreat. In the eyes of the Greeks, it was a victory delivered by Apollo himself, who saw fit to punish the temple-defiling barbarians. Most of the surviving Celts retreated back to Thrace, while a completely dishonored Brenos committed suicide. The Gallic invasion of Greece was a failure, but it had one significant consequence. Before the march on Delphi, a contingent of the Gallic horde, composed mainly of warriors from the Tectosagis, Trocmii, and Telistobokii tribes, had peeled off from the main invasion force and crossed the Dardanelles into Anatolia. Unlike Brenos's main force, which had come to Greece to raid and plunder, this group had come to settle. They built forts on the rugged hills of central Anatolia and established permanence for themselves in the region by serving as mercenary shock troops in the many wars being fought in the region between various Hellenic rulers. The region of Asia Minor these Gauls inhabited became known as Galatia, and the people who lived in it the Galatians. Remarkably, even though they were surrounded by foreign peoples and isolated from the rest of the Gallic world, there is evidence that the Galatians of Anatolia retained their Celtic language and culture as late as the 6th century AD. In 279 BC, the Celtic world was at its greatest extent. Spread out over a massive territory that overlapped the borders of modern nations as diverse as Ukraine, Czechia, Austria, Switzerland, Bulgaria, Turkey, Italy, France, Britain, Portugal, and Spain. This was the golden age of the Celts, but like all golden ages, it was not to last. Brenos's defeat in Greece had proven something important. A well-trained, well-armed professional army, fighting as a single, disciplined body, was fully capable of resisting the howling terror of the Gallic horde. This was a stark reality that the Gauls would soon learn well, as back in Italy, a certain Latin republic was on the mend and ready to take her revenge upon the barbarians who had once laid her so low. The Roman conquests were coming, and if you want to be notified about our videos on them, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see the next video in the series. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.